Dude, this is a suicide mission. And just on a piece of paper, write down one number that you would be happy to basically do this job for.
I think it's not something that many people experiences, to be able to close a six-figure deal. When I was first dealing with my own clients, I felt happy to get $20,000. It wasn't until our common mentor, Paul, was like, nah, that's too cheap, mate.
Yeah.
you should be at 150 grand. And just like that, the exact same client ended up doing 150 grand for me. When times are good, I should be building for when times are bad. It's good to see you again, brother.
Yes, Brian. As always, bro.
I'm interested for you to share your experiences because I heard from the grapevine that you had recently taken on a client and there was a process to taking on that client, which I don't think is shared a lot outside of here. I know, especially like when I was first dealing with my own clients, I felt happy to get $20,000, $30,000 a client. And it wasn't until our common mentor, Paul, was like, nah, that's too cheap, mate.
Yeah.
you should be at 150 grand. And just like that, the exact same client ended up doing 150 grand for me. But I don't want to go into your financials, so you don't have to share if you don't want to. But I heard that you recently did a high ticket client yourself, or you took on a client at a high ticket. And I just want to know how you went through that process. What did you do and how did the engagement go and so forth? How was the experience?
Yeah, 100%, man. So it was an interesting one. And Paul basically used the story. Like he says he watches this YouTube show where these Tassie guys go and like dig gold in like random rivers around Tasmania. I don't know if he's shown you that YouTube channel, but he had a pretty cool analogy around that because oftentimes like that's kind of what we're doing in business. Like we're rummaging around, we're looking for like where the gold deposits are and the rivers and stuff. He basically was like, when that client came through the door and came through my funnel, because the funnel that I had set up was not necessarily trying to attract those sort of big whale type clients. So when that came through the door, Paul, he said that, he was like, look, you've just hit a potential big gold deposit here. And, now it's very important that you're able to sort of get paid what you're worth and get paid the value that you're basically providing for it. And I think in the past, when I've had opportunities like this show up, there's almost been a tendency to not charge the true value of what I was offering. And that's been like part of my own, growth journey and everything. But one exercise Paul did was basically like when we had the opportunity, I was still putting the proposal together phase in the discovery process when I was asking the client questions, trying to really understand like what the job was about. Me and my brother were struggling to basically put a price on it because the current offer that we had for that it was a lot of work for not a lot of pay basically. And so Paul basically did an exercise. He was like, look, just on a piece of paper, write down one number that you would be happy to basically do this job for. And so I wrote down a number, my brother wrote down a number, and then we both sort of said it out loud. And I actually went in like a little lower and my brother went in higher. So my brother said 9K a month. I said like 5 grand a month. And then Paul was like, so Luke, would you be happy to do it for 5K? And I was like, no, to be honest, like I wouldn't. And he said, would you be happy to do it for 9K per month? And I was like, yes, I would. And so that was kind of how we figured out the high ticket price, which seems odd at first because you're like, is that how you come up with your prices? And, in actual fact, it actually made so much sense because, especially when you're engaging like a high ticket client, the tendency is to, sort of get really stuck in the numbers, to charge for your time, to charge for how many hours, how many deliverables, as opposed to charging, for the value that you're providing. So that kind of changed my mindset around it. And I was like, okay, cool. Now we know what we're going to offer this client. How do we basically present it in a way that, presents the value to them? And so that's when the sort of training kicked in of what is the discovery process that you take someone through when you are trying to land a higher ticket client or create this sort of perceived value. And so what I decided to do with it is like really take my time with the discovery process. So it wasn't like a rushed thing. It wasn't just like, hey, what job do you want done? It was more trying to really figure out, what the client's dream state is, like what really motivates them. What is the most desirable outcome that these people can go for? And so I think we did like 2 discovery calls where I was literally just asking questions, like hour-long conversations, recording all of them, writing as many notes as I could. And then once I felt like I had a good understanding of like what their true dream was, what their values were, what these people really wanted to experience. Then I put it together in a proposal and basically sold their idea back to them, which is quite counterintuitive to what I've done in the past, which has been more about like the technicalities, the deliverables. But this is just like bigger picture, like, okay, this is the dream you're trying to go after, and basically reverse engineering a plan and a step-by-step process to basically help them get there. And so we presented that proposal back to them, and they were pretty happy and pretty impressed by it. And then we went through a few more calls where they were just getting more information, asking more questions. And then eventually it was like, cool, sign on the dotted line, like, let's move forward with it. So it was a different angle towards going to high ticket sales, one which wasn't like, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't like trying to close someone on the call then and there, or like trying to be in this place of scarcity, but rather like, okay, this is what you want. This is how we can provide it. And this is the plan to get there. And it was almost like a bit of a dance between them and I, sort of trying to figure, can we dance together? Like, do we have synergy? Because it's when you're going into a high ticket, sort of engagement like that, it's important to make sure like you're both aligned from a value standpoint, because
yes,
like I've been in relationships like that before where the client or the values or something just was misaligned, and it created so much more stress than any amount of money was worth. And like the amount of hours of sleep lost, of peace of mind in my family just ain't worth it. I was like, there's no price tag on that. So that's why the discovery process in sort of high ticket sales is so important, to make sure. And talking about high ticket sales, like 100K, sort of jobs plus, very, very important to make sure you're aligned. So that's why I think just spending like, I think it was like 80% of the time just in that discovery process, trying to figure out like, firstly, am I someone who can help you? And, is this something that is aligned, basically? So that's long and one aspect of the process, basically. So
do you mind if I ask how long that process took, like months wise, weeks wise?
Yeah, so it actually moved pretty swiftly. The client basically booked in a call with me. I didn't really know what to expect. When he started sharing the business idea with me initially, I was like, whoa, okay, well, this is like pretty cool. I just went like into question mode. And I immediately, because he was basically saying, so like, what are your prices? What are your prices on the first call? And I immediately was just like, hang on, you know what, like what's going to be best is like, if we actually just schedule another call, like let's jump on a call in 2 days time. So we jumped on another call 2 days later. And then I prepared some more questions, went through that process again. And I was like, all right, cool. Let's chat this time next week, and I'll have a proposal ready for you. It was actually like a 2-week, 3-week process. Yeah. So it was pretty quick.
Very quick.
But the priority wasn't like convert on the call. It was like, look, let's just take my time with it. And then the proposal, this is from Paul, is like really, the goal was to make sure the proposal I put together was like coated in gold leaf, as Paul would say, and making the proposal look like it's worth the price tag you're basically charging. And so that was the focus.
I congratulate you, because I think it's not something that many people experiences, to be able to close a 6-figure deal, effectively 6-figure per year, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
In a space of 2 weeks. I personally couldn't do that quickly myself. The client that I took on, I first met him in November of 2020 or 2020. And deal was done in March 2021. So that's, what's that? November, December, January, February, March. 5 months.
Yeah.
So to do it in 2 weeks, pretty good.
Well, I mean, look, it's taken, from the time they agreed to the time the contract had been signed and the money had been released, took maybe a month after that. So it's like, it's not, sort of super quick in that sense. I think the biggest, sort of takeaway with that is the idea of just patience and not like rushing. I think the part that's really difficult for people who have not had that experience before to get their head around is to look at it from the perspective of the value of, when I say value, people go, oh yeah, I'm valuable, but what does value actually mean? Yeah.
I think it's common between your client and my client as well, where we're dealing with, on the marketing side, it's at the end of the day, for the client, it's an investment.
Yes.
Where they're putting in money and they're expecting a return, which it's getting closer to their goals.
Yes.
But they're always looking at it from a, if I'm putting in X amount, do I get back that plus more? And for somebody who hasn't experienced or seen the impact of what your work can do, what your contributions can do to the client's business, it's very difficult to value, well, how much am I actually worth?
Yeah, yeah.
And how much should I actually charge?
Yeah, yeah.
I would say that's probably the biggest thing. However, I don't know if you might have a different experience, but from my experience, the good parts were getting clients at high ticket. The parts that I found personally stressful going through that experience when I was doing it was, number one, the amount of me that got sucked into the day-to-day operations,
Yes.
dealing with it.
Yes.
Ended up causing a lot of personal stress,
Yes.
which, in hindsight, it's a good thing, but it was stressful.
Yeah.
And the other thing as well is, at least for me, when I went through it, I found that my entire livelihood depended on just that one client
Yes.
at that time.
Yes.
And I didn't so much have insecurity going through it as in, oh, what if the client drops me in tomorrow or something? It was actually more when it actually ended up happening, where the client went, okay, I think our professional relationship is done. I've learned what I need to learn from your systems. I'm going to do it myself with my own team, right? At least in my case, to go from a reliable client to then that one source of income, boom, disappearing, for me was the shock at the time. Is that something that you would take into
Yes.
things that you've experienced as well? Or is that something that...
Yeah, 100%, man. So that resonates massively because my business was fully agency world. Okay. So it would be very reliant on a few core clients paying the majority of our income.
Mm-hmm.
And so the difficulty with that, exactly like you said, is that, clients come and go. And most of the time when you're a sort of, one person operator, or you've got two people on your team and you're a small team, like a big client like that takes up one hell of a lot of your time. And it takes up so much of your time that you're so focused on delivery and execution that you don't actually have time for your own marketing and your own ability to sort of generate consistent clients. And so, what typically happened to me in the past, and what I see a lot of people fall into, is that sort of feast or famine cycle. It's like 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, you're like feasting and life's great and money's coming in and you're busy and it's like all chaotic and blah, blah, blah. And then next thing, boom, like you're completely sort of stuck in the wind. You're like, oh shit, let me get my marketing back up and running. Now let me get my sales back up and running. And then you do that, you spend a few months on that, then you get another client, and then you focus on delivery, and then the sales and the marketing completely stops again. And it's just this constant sort of stop and start of feast or famine. And, that whole process for me personally put me so far off business. I think I honestly was like traumatized by it. Like I was so stuck in this like complete anxiety about that sort of feast or famine that basically set me off on a chain of events, which was like, I got to create something which is more scalable and automated and digital than sort of like extremely high touch done for you services. And so now it's like, I will literally only go into an engagement like this if I feel like the job is extremely aligned. Like, for example, the other day I did a similar proposal to a similar client for a similar price, and they accepted the job. And they came back just before they wanted to agree on the price. And they basically gave us a bunch of demands saying that we need instant results. We need instant this. We can't spend time in the planning phase. And I basically just said, look, I don't think we can help you. Like, I actually don't think this is going to work out. If you guys want to come back in the future and work on some of the foundational work that we take you through, then great. But for now, like, this ain't going to be aligned. Because I showed my brother one of his messages, and this is what I mean by it being a dance in the discovery phase, because you got to figure out if the person is willing to dance with you. And this person he had signals, like the tone in the message was like, there was something off. And Zach basically said, dude, this is a suicide mission. And he said it's a suicide mission. And so we just sent a message back, and we were just like, no, thank you. And I went to the sauna with Zach afterwards, and I was like, Zach, I feel really relaxed and calm right now. I'm like really happy we didn't do that. So choice is a luxury in this space. Now I'm able to go into this engagement with less sort of reliance on this job because I have like lower ticket digital things that are sort of building up momentum and has that sort of regular income and that recurring revenue. So it's not like, this is the only thing, which is a blessing in a way, because it's not always been like that. Like I was deep in the feast or famine cycle for many, many, many years. And that's why I think if someone is looking for, more of a high ticket, high touch solution, like having that digital, automated and scalable system is like flipping so worth building, because when you get to a stage where that gives you the ability to make income without spending more time in the business, it's like a real weight off your chest. And then you can work with clients at this higher level and actually enjoy the work with them, especially if it's aligned to your values and everything. So I completely agree with you. And I know that's a privileged place to be in, to not have to like rely so heavily on those high ticket things. But you're the king of the low ticket community, bro. Like you got that low ticket thing pumping. So in a way that's like, that.
Well, I have an advantage because I speak bilingual, so I speak a different language. And when you look at the country that I blew up being, we've got a big, it's a country with 300 million people. And so getting just 4,500 people on a monthly recurring subscription type thing. When you look at it from the perspective of, well, that's 4,000 out of 300 million people. That's not even 0.000, whatever 1% it is. So in that sense, I think it was a lot to do with luck, being at the right place, right time, right generation. Demographics wise, it's also a country with very good demographics, a lot of young people, productive people. In that sense, there's a factor of luck to it, which I can't exclude. However, as somebody like Andrew Tate would say, luck is something you can manufacture.
Yeah.
And it's luck that came out of multiple attempts of trying.
Yes. Well, that's why I don't know if it's luck, because you were producing content on YouTube, you were putting your stuff out there, creating value at the end of the day. And if you weren't in that position, there's no ways that would have happened. So, yes, timing plays a factor, but at the same time, you created that luck for yourself, I think.
Correct. In terms of that, though, what I've recently discovered, there's an actual direct impact on what the market's doing and what my subscriptions are doing as well. It kind of correlates to each other. But that being said, I think in terms of lessons that I've learned, the positive lessons are, once you do have that very stable monthly recurring income going, it does give you a lot of flexibility and freedoms that I didn't experience before that. Again, we're talking about prior to was dealing with clients and, feast-or-famine, as you said, to then going, hey, I'm literally generating 6 figures every month, and it's recurring. It's from several thousands of subscribers. So if any one of them decides to leave, it's not going to impact me that much. So there's that certain degree of freedom. But I think the thing that needs to consistently be reminded is that every single business has seasons and cycles, and every single business has a good time and a bad time. As an entrepreneur, I think while every effort is made to make sure that the growth curve is as stable as it can be, there is always going to be a something, a factor X, a black swan event, a whatever that happens along the way that might put things off. I can take this into analogy, like there's a couple of people that I've met in the past that had massively successful businesses in network marketing, for example, and they're generating I think one of them was doing 7 figures, but definitely several 6-figure MLM people. And life was good until somewhere on the upline, so somebody above them, decided to jump ship to a different MLM or network marketing company. And that meant everything on the downline got wiped out. Boom, overnight, right? And so I'm not wishing this on anybody. I'm not expecting it to happen to anybody in particular. But all I'm saying is that every business has a hiccup somewhere in the middle. And so part of what I think is entrepreneurship is anticipating that when times are good, I should be building for when times are bad. Whereas what most people do is when times are good, I feel good. and they get complacent.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. It does.
So while times are good, it's to build whatever the next thing is required so that when or if times go bad, there is steps in place. It depends on what stage of growth each individual's at. I'm fortunate enough that I made a fair amount so that, on the investment sides, I know I'm okay. So part of when things are bad is, well, just make sure I'm invested and I have my wealth in things that I at least have several years, in fact, of if I don't do anything, I'm still okay. Right. But in addition to that, it's also building up, not necessarily other businesses, because if you detract too far from your core business, then it becomes juggling two different things. But I would say expanding ecosystem, if that makes sense. I subscribe to the idea that most businesses follow either the upcycle or the down cycle of the overall economy. So, for example, a builder that builds houses, will see growth in his business when the economy is growing. And when the economy is maybe in recession or going through a crisis, that's where a lot of builders go bust. Contracts that don't get paid, building materials are, you need to pay for building materials, the customer's not paying, there's an inflation in the cost of building, blah, blah, blah. So there are businesses that do well in up cycles and bad in down cycles. But then there are businesses that do well in down cycles and not so well in up cycles. For example, network marketing businesses do very well when the cycles are going down. And the reason for that is because why do people join network marketing? Because they want a side hustle, a new source of income, something that they can do from home even. And so network marketing as a business model tends to do very well when job security is really bad, when what you earn from your main job isn't enough to pay for the lifestyle you desire, right? So that's a general, in a downturn market, network marketing does well. Any type of education or any type of let me help show you how to make more money. Let me show you how to build a business. Let me show you how to improve your sales. Those types of businesses will do well in a downturn market. And so, at least in my head anyway, it's good to have a business for when times are good and a business for when times are bad. That's how my mind thinks.
I love it. That resonates, man.
It's just having contingencies.
Yes.
And maybe that's the phase that I'm currently in. I don't know if it's necessarily the correct way or the optimal way of seeing things. But after a certain age and after reaching a certain financial goal, one of the things that starts to creep in mentally is I got to make sure I keep it. And I recognize in myself that might be not the best thing to think about. Maybe. It might be something that actually detracts me from doubling down on what works, maybe.
Whoa.
But it is certainly something I feel at this stage.
Well, it's really interesting what you said. And I think to sort of add to that, what's coming up for me when you say that is just this idea of seasons and literally spring, winter, spring, summer, winter. Oh, I'm getting the seasons screwed up here.
Yeah. The 4 seasons.
The 4 seasons. And, it sort of reminds me of, when I had my first business, which was a video production company. I started that business. I think it was really positive economic times. Businesses were spending a lot of money on big productions and production houses and everything. So we jumped in and I was like, whoa, we're making some good money off the back. Everyone is agreeing to our jobs and this is fantastic. We're busy all the time. And then as soon as COVID came around and people completely shut their doors and things sort of shut off and things started, moving online, that source of income closed down incredibly quickly, overnight almost. I didn't have the street smarts at that point to do what you're saying and be like, okay, what am I investing into? How am I maintaining my wealth? Because I was like, all my eggs are in this basket. What the hell do I do now? And so, I had to pivot pretty quickly. At the time, I didn't have, a baby on the way. I didn't have a wife. I was relatively low cost living. But I was still living in London. It wasn't an ideal place to be living because that was extremely high cost. I was living pretty much central London. That basically made me realize that the seasons were a real thing real quickly, because when we were making good money, I remember people saying to us make hay while the sun shines, this is cool. And in the back of my head, I was like, okay, well, times are really good right now, but are they going to last? What's going to happen? And so as soon as that sort of took a downturn, it was scramble mode to pivot into the online space. So I could start basically diversifying my income. And then those 3 or 4 years were incredibly challenging because I was I had to develop new skills. I had to learn how to actually market myself, learn how to create value online, which was a completely new world to me. I knew it from a commercial standpoint, but I had always done it for other clients. I'd never done it for myself. And so that kind of leads back to that whole feast or famine thing, where it's the most important thing, I believe, is to basically, and then maybe that comes into your idea of having something for the up, something for the down, or something that works all the time. But, I really do think that when things are working really well, being able to sort of plan for the future, as you're saying, for those sort of black swan events like a COVID, or what happened with you and the meme coins, the old season sort of coming to an abrupt end. And the analogy that sort of pops off in my head is if you could basically win in the winter, just imagine what happens when summer initially comes back around. And
Absolutely.
So I would say that we're probably in, like, if we were to look at the global scale, like we're probably in a global winter right now. I think we're, would you agree with that?
Times now are definitely much harder than they were for our grandparents.
Yeah.
And this is something that it's difficult to talk about to, perhaps I'll call them the uninitiated,
Yes.
the people that haven't actually read the history books, the ones that
Yeah.
haven't actually gone through hundreds of years of what's actually happened.
Yeah.
It turns out that it's been pretty much doing the exact same thing every 100 or so years for the
Yes.
last 3,000 years.
Yes.
And there's all sorts of conversations we can have around that going down the rabbit hole. But in terms of where are we now, you don't really need to use theory too much. You just look at who do you know that's 20 or 30 years old, that's able to live husband and wife where only one of them works, and be able to very legitimately pay off a house
Yeah.
to own it outright.
Yeah.
Who do you know in that age bracket that's actually doing that? And the answer is, what, less than 1%?
Yeah.
I don't know the exact statistic. There's probably are people in that boat, but it's very few. I don't know anybody in my school group, so the
Yeah.
people I grew up in school, I don't know anybody that's
Yeah.
in that field, probably except for myself.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at our grandparents or even our parents' generation,
Yeah.
could they just husband working, wife stays at home, looks after kid, 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, and pay off a home and own it before they even retired, and then maybe get a second home? Could they do that very realistically? A lot of them could.
Yeah.
A lot of them could. So are we in a winter? Absolutely. In previous cycles, when it's time for the reset, it's usually done either through war, so war, revolution. There are very, very rare occasions where the ruler gets overthrown. So in China, for instance, every couple of centuries, a dynasty comes up where an old dynasty dies, the old emperor gets killed, and the new emperor rises. But there's always a reset button. And that reset button usually results in the death of a lot of people. And it also means a lot of the wealth that was in the hands of a concentrated few gets redistributed to a lot of people. That is what normally happened in the last several centuries. The thing that I don't know that of this particular cycle is there are 2 factors that I can't account for. Number one, this is the first time in recorded history where there's a very strong chance that robots and intelligent computers, so AI, is very likely going to replace a lot of need for humans in the workforce. When we're looking at every couple hundred years, there's a reset button, wealth gets redistributed, right? The guys that hold the wealth don't want to let go of their wealth. If you imagine yourself being that Lord Baron of whatever town with vineyards everywhere and cows and all the important assets, right? If you're in that position, you would rather all the masses sort of go collapse on each other, go at war at each other, blacks versus whites, Christians versus Muslims, whatever, right? Go against each other, and I'll enjoy my wealth. And when it gets to the point of, but this is the first time in history where theoretically you could actually wipe out a lot of humans and still have an operating factory and still have an operating money machine. And then the rest of it just becomes, but then who's the customer? Because if all the humans are wiped out, who's buying the things that are getting produced? And so then I start to think about, you know how there's this concept of universal basic income. It's being explored in certain countries where let's just hand every citizen every month a certain amount of money. And you'd think from the perspective of the common folk, they're going, oh, nice, what a friendly government. They're giving me free money. But at the end of the day, it doesn't end up in the common person's back pocket because they have to spend it. And so it gets spent with the people that have the factories, with robots running everything. So how's that going to play out? That's the only thing that I don't quite see yet. But in terms of, are we in tough times? Absolutely. Yeah.
It's really interesting what you say there, because I completely agree in the sense that we're in a global winter and it's almost like it's boiling up to something, like at some form of a peak event, some form of a reset, as you said. And, like in the past, they've talked about global wars. And I think, Paul actually mentioned this. He was like, we might actually have, like, World War III might be happening already, except it's happening through trade. It's happening behind the closed doors. It's happening through geopolitics. Not necessarily, all-out war as we knew it in World War II. What I'm sort of seeing and what I think is going to happen is that this big booming creator economy where people are able to get into, the exploring their human passions and communicating their meaning, their purpose, and all of these sort of more sort of soft skills as opposed to very, very technical skills that an AI or a robot can basically replace. I really do think that we're going to see a big growth in this idea of the meaning economy.
Yes,
W-
I
you know what I
actually put
mean?
together a piece of content on that,
Okay.
and I said in that video, I was like, you have to start thinking about the things that AI can't easily
Yes.
replace. And I used a very vulgar, nasty example in it, but it was a very visual and easy to recognize one. Like the example that I used was, well, I don't know about you, but if I was gonna have a physical, intimate relationship with someone, it would be a lady because I'm straight, and I don't want it to be a robot. I want it to be human. Right? So prostitution as a business, love as a business,
Yeah.
although it's a vulgar example,
Yeah.
is a business that I'm pretty confident will out. It'll still be around even with AI and robots.
Well, we'll
But then
see, bro, because we'll see because
they got sex dolls now.
yeah, bro, and you can just imagine that they're gonna look so real, and it's gonna be like that movie Her. Like, and there's so many men out there who are afraid of actually speaking to ladies and speaking to women that I could see that just being a huge thing and potentially a really damaging thing for society if you consider the fact that birth rates are already dropping incredibly low. Like people who
maybe
are like yeah.
Maybe we need a campaign for having lots of babies then.
Yeah, or maybe me and you just need to like basically have way more kids. But it's like the funny thing, dude, I created this video the other day which was like the plot of Idiocracy is coming true. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Idiocracy, but basically they have this opening scene where they basically have this split screen between two couples. One couple is like a highly intelligent couple, like high IQ. The other couple is like super low IQ, like hillbilly style. And they basically are sat the two down like they're having an interview. And the one couple's basically saying, we're really thinking about the right time to have a kid. The market forces aren't really favorable right now. We're both working two jobs. And then it cuts to the other family and they basically have a family tree and it's just popping new kids out like every few months. And they're just like, yeah, we're basically getting it on. And then their family's growing, their family tree's growing. And then it pops back to the high IQ couple and they're like, yeah, we're still thinking about it. And then before you know it, like however many years have passed, the one lady, she can't even have babies anymore. And the other families like spawned, 50 to 100 kids. And so it's like this split between the intelligent, high IQ people who are like really maybe even overthinking the process of having kids because maybe they're aware of certain things or blah blah blah, and the other family is just going crazy at it. It was a really stark sort of almost like premonition that this movie had, which I feel like in some ways is coming true because if you look at some of the poorest countries out there, they're popping out kids like there's no tomorrow.
Whereas it's ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's ironic that we call them the poorest countries in the world, but it's the easiest countries to have kids in.
Right, exactly.
And generally speaking, you can tell how prosperous a nation's citizens are by the average birth rate per woman in that specific country.
Yeah.
Because despite what an individual might think, statistically, if you have lots of people in the country having babies, then that's a sign that they are prosperous. It's a sign that raising a kid isn't a massive burden. And if you make having a kid easy to have financially, then people will naturally want to have children because it's a very biological function to do. And so when you have countries that are called first world countries, so Korea is a first world country, South Korea, Japan, and yet they have less than one birth per woman, so they're actually in a massive population decline. That tells me, yeah, sure, you might have good food, you might have good transport, you might have a roof over your head and you can afford the rent, but you can't afford the kid. At least you don't perceive that you can. And then you go to a country, say in Indonesia as another example, or in Africa, many African countries where raising a kid is literally like an extra $30 a month, for example, which I know to the local population that's a lot of money, but it's an amount that a lot of people can afford. And so having kids is just easy.
Yeah. Well, the reality is, all right, I'm 31 now, okay? The majority of my friends back in the UK are not having kids yet. Okay. Now, in old times, if you look at our parents' times, like that would have been unheard of, right? They were, I think my dad and my mom had kids relatively late for their sort of generation, but it was still in their late 20s. The reality is, like, if I was still living in the UK, I probably wouldn't be having a baby. I probably wouldn't have started a family at this point. And, I think that is, sort of added to the fact that obviously the cost of living is insane. The lifestyle is not also conducive to healthy reproductive cycles. Like I don't know what the statistics are, but most women in the UK, and I don't want to like say something too inaccurate right now, but let's just say from my own experience, the majority of the women that I knew in the UK were all on birth control as well. Just because if something did happen and they did happen to have a kid, it would be incredibly, incredibly damaging to their career, to their lifestyle, to the way that they live there. And because the cost of living is so high, we moved to Bali and it is so much more accessible and easy. And because of the lifestyle as well, where you are more calm and more relaxed and you've got more peace, you've got more space. Like you said, it's so much more accessible to basically start a family here. Now, whether you want to go into the whole, this whole argument of neo-colonialism, of, rich white people moving to poorer countries to start families and all this stuff, like that's maybe a conversation for another day.
But I have a counter argument.
Well, I'm not saying that it's a problem because I'm doing it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm just saying there's an argument against that. And I would love to hear what you're saying. But I've wanted to be a father for many years, right? And finally, it's basically given us that environment to do it in a way that gives us space. We're not stressed. Both of us aren't having to work. And we can actually do it in a way which feels really natural and feels really sort of abundant. And I think that, to me, has just been a really stark contrast between, potentially my friends in the UK who are deciding to delay it until some point in the future where things are a bit safer and they have maybe a bit more money stored up or whatever it is. It's been really interesting to see that. Anyway, I would love to hear what you think about the whole neo-colonialism thing.
Save it for another time.
Okay.
Something that I do, and this is for the viewers, really. What about being a parent when you're still finding your way in business? My experience is, I remember very clearly, I was very anxious or hesitant on starting a family at first. Not because I didn't want to be a father, I wanted it. It was the what if things. Like, what if I can't provide? And for me, it was actually my wife. Call this cookie talk or call me crazy if you like. But basically, my wife has a knack for just saying things off the cuff, intuitively. And at the time she says it, it doesn't sound like it's, how the hell would that work? But it ends up working out. And so she said, well, when we do have the baby, that's going to be the year where you achieve way more success than you've ever achieved in your entire, career so far. Right? I'm a guy that, because I've known my wife for that long, I know she has a knack for doing that, just saying stuff that ends up working out exactly as she said. And I was like, okay, so that puts me at ease in mind. And so we had the baby, and lo and behold, that year was the year where, financially, it just completely changed. It took me to a different stratosphere. So that's my experience of being a father in terms of tying it into the business side. Okay. Yeah. I'd like to sort of find out from your side as well, if that's ever been something that you considered.
Yes.
Finances and baby, business and baby.
Yes.
Or is that something that you just go, look, let it go with the flow? Or what's it been like?
Bro, 100%. So, that was a huge fear of mine. Okay. A huge fear of mine was that whole idea of, having a human that you need to look after, another person. I guess from, where I was brought up and the culture I was brought up, it's like the idea of having another baby and going through pregnancy is a burden, where the woman is almost seen as having an ailment or being ill. They talk about patience. They talk about, when a lady goes into the hospital, they're treated like a sick person in a way. So the culture basically brings you up to think that a baby and starting a family is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And it's like, oh my God, you're starting a family. You sure you're ready for this? Sure. And it's always this doom or gloom. That at least that's what I experienced. When we basically stepped into it, what I started to experience was actually completely the opposite. And someone said to me, and this was the first time I had heard this different perspective, was that babies bring abundance.
Yeah. Amen.
And it was the first time I felt that. And I was like, holy crap, babies bring abundance. And even through this last 9 months through our pregnancy, my business never done better. And I've never had more opportunities. I've never had more growth in what's happening in my mindset, and almost stepping out of being completely stuck in this warrior mindset where I just got to grind harder, nose to the grindstone, almost forcing myself to be okay, I'm stepping out of that warrior into more of this king energy, as opposed to, it's how can I strategically build something that gives me more time, gives me more freedom, so I can spend time with my child who's being born. So it almost forced me to think of business and think of life in a completely different way, one which was more
Mm.
expansive, one which was more scalable, and almost made me give up certain limiting beliefs around that whole scarcity thing. And so I think part of it is I was in a different environment to the enculturated environment where it was like, oh my God, a baby is a burden, to an environment where a baby brings abundance. And in that environment of the baby brings abundance, I'm just like, wow, like this is really true. And it's been true for me. And obviously, in your experience, it's amazing that Bika actually said that, because that basically plays into that whole idea. Now, I'm not saying, and again, I'm yet to be a dad, and I know there's so many challenges to come and everything like this, but I genuinely feel like it comes down to the perspective that you have around it. I think if you are sort of just trying to figure out things or get your career up and running, I think what a baby has done for me is forced me to think on a bigger picture.
Yes,
You know what I'm saying? And that change
absolutely.
in perspective has literally changed my ability to see opportunities. How deep do I want to get into certain projects? Where is the highest point of leverage? How best can I structure my day in a way that I'm most productive or most efficient so I can step away? Because before that, when my whole world revolved around me and me only, like I would almost become more consumed by my work and almost stuck more in the details as opposed to being more strategic about what I was doing. That's been sort of my experience with it. And I think it comes down to the environment that you're in and the reference points you have. Because in the UK, again, the reference points I had around childhood and rearing babies in London was one of depression, anxiety, stress. And it was a terrible burden to a lot of the friends that I saw go through that experience. And so another one has been learning about, like learning about having a baby, like learning about what happens to the baby when they're born. Like, how does a baby see the world? How does their brain basically develop from 0 to 3? Like, what's happening in that baby's mind? How can you as a parent set them up for less trauma and more success, let's just say, or just a more fulfilled life? And in learning about that, I've inadvertently learned about my own childhood and how I was when I was growing up and how all of the things that happened to me as a kid. So this last 9 months has almost been this process of like unlearning and learning about my own makeup since I was a child, and almost having an opportunity to almost rewrite that story for myself. So, and I
How
think
powerful is that?
that plays into the fact that, a baby and bringing a new life into the world can actually be an experience that teaches, like, you're teaching the kid, but the kid is teaching you, almost more to some degree. Because, what I'm really looking forward to personally is actually relearning and re-seeing the world through a child's eyes, one of
Mm.
curiosity and one of like, wow, expansion and possibility. Because, what says potential and just like unmet and unbound and unrelented, just complete possibility than a newborn baby. You know what I'm saying? And so babies bring abundance, and that's kind of the way I'm trying to look at it. And it's been true. It's been true.
And it shows, by the way. At least from my perspective, I've known you for this long.
But I mean,
Um,
obviously, you've been through it, over the last, almost year now. I think Sophia must be close to a year
yeah,
now,
yeah,
right?
yes, yes.
Um, what was your sort of experience of that learning relationship between you and your daughter? Like, sort of obviously trying to teach her, but like, what are some of the things that she taught you?
Oh, so many things that I had to unlearn as well, hey? Because before learning about raising kids and stuff, I was like, okay, I'm gonna set my kid up to learn math and science at this age, but you know what I mean, like very Asian probably mindset. But then going through fatherhood, I realized that I don't actually need to teach the baby anything because they are naturally curious. They will actually naturally learn. It's more about putting them in the most abundant environment for them to explore at the pace at which they want to explore. It took me being a father to realize that it's not about me and my expectations on the baby. It's about, well, she's at the stage where she's learning how to sense things. She's at the stage where she's learning how to flip around and blah, blah, blah. And it's all those little tiny building blocks. And play for the child is extremely important. Just being there, being in the environment that's ideal for the baby. I've got one of my baby's crayons in my hand. But being in the environment where the baby can naturally explore and playing with, because play is learning. I think that's been a massive learning thing. Now, what I also found is, just like, as you said, babies bring abundance. I totally agree. It hasn't only helped me understand myself more, it's also applied to other things in business. So, for example, with my employees, I see, okay, so that's the childhood you were raised with, and that's the background. I see it in the employees, I see it in the customers, I see it in pretty much everywhere I go. It's definitely had a spill-on effect to have a more mature perspective. And it's one of the things that I've since learned, like picking good leaders, whether it's a president of a country or somebody in a company. One of the things I look at is, are you a father? Are you a mother? Because there's a perspective you get out of that I believe you just can't get without being one. But that said, I have met exceptions.
Yeah.
The wisest parent I know is somebody who's never had a kid. But as a general rule of thumb, it does definitely teach a lot. So
yeah, awesome, man. Yeah. From your perspective, what's been your sort of experience with, being a dad and running a business at the same time? Like, how have you sort of managed your time and stayed productive?
I don't see myself as the optimal father, which is, it might not sound the best saying that, but I always think I can do more for my kid. I can be there more for my kid. That thought is always in, for now anyway, it's still playing in my head. Well, I think we talked about quite a bit there. What do you think? Shall we wrap it up on this particular episode, or?
Yeah, I think so, man. Let's keep the conversation going. We'll chat again next week. There's so many things that I want to sort of dive in and ask you about and sort of explore. So I think let's keep this running as like an ongoing series. And if anyone, sort of interested, follow along for the journey.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll wrap this episode up, and then I'll switch the cameras and batteries around and have a fresh one in. If you want to have another conversation, we can keep going, and we'll keep posting as things come.
Amazing. Awesome. Let's do it.
Thanks, brother.
Cheers, bro.